Hello friends, this is Junta again with another one of my inspiring and maybe unnerving talks, but here it is. You know, I'm going to say today that, and this may shock a lot of you, that the most beneficial person in the freeing of black people was not black. It wasn't Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, because we're still in the same mess that we were in before. Believe me, I love Dr. King. I love his heart. I love what he tried to do. I was sad and cried during his death, and just like everybody else that had a lot of empathy for our black people. But the bottom line was Dr. King's movement was no more than talk and marching. And then we have the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who supposedly took over. No, he's never been a great leader for the freedom and justice of our people, because his message basically was a message of smooth speech and a freedom/political rhetoric. I love my brother dearly, don't get me wrong. But Reverend Jesse Jackson didn't do hardly anything to help the plight of our people compared to what he could have done, in my opinion. Let's look at Malcolm X. Malcolm X was an eloquent speaker. He was a freedoms fighter. He was a motivator. But the greatest award for being the greatest civil rights freedom fighter, in my opinion, definitely was not Malcolm X, because his message was motivating, but other than giving folks some information about the history of white man that he learned from Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, should I say, he didn't do much at all either. So Malcolm X was never one of our great freedom fighters. I love my brother. I know what his intentions were, but it wasn't Malcolm. Let's take a Huey P. Newton, took over the head of the Black Panther Party, whom I originally heard they call themselves the Sons of Malcolm. Well, the Black Panther Party rallied community support among black people. But the movement wasn't very effective. It didn't affect many people on a national level. So he can't be considered to be our greatest freedom fighter. Nelson Mandela, with what he did in South Africa, did nothing really to help us here in the United States, so we can just end that right there. Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, no, he wasn't our great leader. You know, the brother was good at addressing the crowds and talking about the problems and trying to do a Pan-African connection, but still, he was not our great leader. Winnie Mandela, well, maybe if she'd been over here, we'd had more success, but her work stopped in South Africa, did nothing for Negroes here. Marcus Garvey, well, he had a complete plan, but it was cut short. So he wasn't the greatest civil rights fighter, in my opinion. Then who was the greatest civil rights fighter? Well, Minister Louis Farrakhan has the most complete plan, but as far as fighting the system and making changes on an immediate level, Minister Farrakhan would not even be in that category of the greatest civil rights freedom fighter of all time. However, I want to make a notice that Minister Farrakhan has done more through teaching black people economics, using religion to get us in the right frame of mind, and he's done it over a duration of time that his legacy is really ingrained in the minds of millions of people. He did a lot to change our thinking, and when you change a person's thinking, whether it's to enslave them and make them think inferior, or to raise them by making them thinking superior. He's done a tremendous amount. So his work is monumental in following the footsteps of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He also had the potential to group. He didn't speak about always being nonviolent. So because of the potential of violence coming from that group, he's had a tremendous impact upon not only the United States, but the world. But as far as fighting, being a freedom fighter, I still would not give him the category of being the greatest freedom fighter. Well, then who would be? In my opinion, it's going to be shocking to you, because I'm basing this upon history, not upon what could be, not upon emotion, but upon history. And the history is this: the greatest civil rights fighter of all time was a white man. Did you choke? Have you cussed me out yet? Did you say, nigga, please? Get the hell off? I don't want to hear no more? Wait till I give you some information. Frederick Douglass agrees with my statement. He stated to many that he agreed with my statement. And I want to give you some information and give you the name of this person. He actually was called Ulysses Grant. His real name was Hiram, but they mistakenly in the academy got Ulysses there on his record somewhere, so it just remained. But let me tell you why I say that he is the greatest civil rights fighter of our time, and even before our time. He freed his only slave that he had in St. Louis. He went down to the courthouse and voluntarily freed the one slave that he had, because when he was living with the Dent family in St. Louis, he became so disgusted and so appalled with slavery that it affected his entire life. Though he were a white man with skin color, his heart went out to the sufferings of black people. He said, it is not fair that they be treated the way they were treated, and they didn't ask to be here. And he meant that. Now, what did he do? Because with the great love I have for all of my brothers that I named before, doing the best that they could do, they never accomplished this level. Even Barack Obama never, ever, ever came close to the accomplishments of this white man. Let me talk about what he did. Before you cuss me out and call me a handkerchief head nigga, listen to this, because I'm going to get you to take that handkerchief and dust off Ulysses Grant's picture out of your mind. According to Frederick Douglass, without General Grant, the slaves would have never become free. General Grant fought General Robert E. Lee, who wanted to keep slavery and wanted to make the United States a place for white folks. Even though they attended the same academy in West Point, General Lee was a proponent of the South. He wanted the South to have their way, keep slaves, and oppose anybody and anything that would say anything other than that. General Grant, on the other hand, was appalled with slavery. And even though General Robert E. Lee was the premier graduate, and General Grant was far from that, graduated somewhere in the middle of the class, history teaches that General Grant is the one that became victor. And this is probably why I have the freedom today, among other things, but that kicked off my having the freedom today to even bring this presentation. General Grant wanted equal treatment for all men. He truly believed in the concept that all men were created equal. Not only believed, but put it into not only words, but also put it into action and put it into law and put it into practice. You know, at one time, General Grant and President Andrew Johnson became enemies over the issue of freeing the slaves. Abraham Lincoln was not a freedom fighter for black people. It's on record that he said if he could save the Union and not free the slaves, he would do just that. So it's not honest Abe. Abe actually was not really in our corner. He was in the corner of saving the Union. But General Grant wanted black people to have equal rights to white and all people to have equal rights. So eventually, after President Abraham Lincoln's notoriety fell, and we see that President Andrew Johnson came in. Ulysses Grant ran for president at the age of 46 after he became known as a great fighter for civil rights. And think about this. This man not only believed it, over about 800,000 men died in the Civil War. General Grant was the first one to really accept the black slaves and to use them as Union soldiers. At first they were leery, but they had one little minor skirmish, and they found that the black men fought loyally and faithfully and with great skill. So that became a very important part of the Civil War, that the slaves would get a chance to bear arms, and they probably really had an axe to grind. They probably couldn't even imagine in a million years that somebody would arm them to fight the white people who have treated them so cruelly, punished them, hung them from trees, and abused them. So they fought with great valor. And that great valor made the difference in the Civil War. Yes, it did. Just like with many other wars since, it's been the black soldier that has made the difference. Now, when President Grant was running a candidate for office, the central issue of his campaign was still, he didn't change and go to something else. His campaign wasn't like Barack Obama, some, we can make a change type of thing. His campaign was the issue of equal rights for slaves. Equal rights. And he won. And the 15th Amendment had been sitting up there, and nobody would pass the 15th Amendment because it was supposed to give black folks the right to vote. He not only verbalized his intentions, but unlike Barack Obama, he went through and he actually forced this issue to go through that gave black people the right to vote. He put action where his mouth was. Didn't Jesus say, you know them by their fruit? A good tree does not bring forth corrupt fruit, neither does a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. And we got a lot of Negroes running around today that are running their mouth and they do nothing but talk. It's a agenda to gain notoriety and to be publicly known for your orations versus then your devotion and your actual deeds that you do. So what else did this man do? What did he do? He helped to lead a war that 800,000 men were killed in, and we can probably assume that 600,000 of those men were white men. And how many Confederate soldiers? Thousands, probably 300,000 or 400,000 white men like himself, he implemented the killing of, to stand up for his position on civil rights. And the Negroes we got today won't even go against anybody to stand up for the rights of black people. They'll sell us out. They talk stuff. As soon as they get in position, they forget about everything that they promised to do. He delivered, but he killed white people. His own people. That's how much he believed in civil rights for the slaves. Now you tell me, who can match that if I go no further? Gave us the right to vote. That was a big thing back then. You subject to be hung from a tree yourself, killed, assassinated like Lincoln, anything, but he still stood his ground. President Grant also passed legislation. Unlike Barack, who passed it for everybody but us, he passed legislation for federal troops to be used to fight against subversive groups. So he used these groups, not only passed the law for others to use, but he used these groups to fight the Ku Klux Klan and other anti-slavery groups. Use federal troops, federal power to protect us all over the nation. That's powerful, people. That's powerful. This is something that has not been done since. Take all of our civil rights workers and all of our civil rights leaders. I love them all. But what have they done beyond talk, begging, and marching? Nothing. So we kill our own people for nothing. He killed his own people for our freedom. That's big. I don't know how many people would do that. When the white man started the Colfax massacre and lynched and killed blacks and killed anti-slavery whites, this was in rebellion to the success of President Grant. See, white folks were killing one another, but Grant still was standing up that you black people deserve to be treated equally as well as all people. How many of our black leaders today have stood and done so much? At the end of the Reconstruction, white men rallied to make America a place for white people only. That was after he lost power, after he retired. Grant was the black. Grant said the black man was not brought here to be treated unequally, and he was possessed with that. God used him. God filled him with empathy, and he put that empathy into action all his entire life. Other than Minister Farrakhan, with the best of his ability, if he was president, we would see what he would do, and I'm sure he could match that kind of record because he's got the heart to do it. But other than that, we have just a bunch of talkers. So I'm going to ask you, do you agree with my statement that Hiram Grant, known as Ulysses Grant, the former general, known as the civil rights president, was the greatest civil rights fighter of all time? You find me one better, and you'll be hard-pressed to come close to a man that did so much. I'm going to give you a quick synopsis. He freed his only slave. He led a war that defeated General Robert E. Lee, that broke the back of the South, the pro-slavery army. Never quit. There were so many men dead at one point. I think it was Vicksburg, when he said you couldn't even step across an area of ground without stepping on a dead person. 24,000, I think, were killed just in that little skirmish alone. We're talking about 800,000 in total. But he kept on going. Through all that carnage, he still felt like black people deserve the right. I will fight to my death. At one time, his horse was shot. He was shot somewhere on the leg. I think the bullet bounced off. But he continued. Despite the fact that white folks probably would have hung him and killed him. Despite the fact that Confederate soldiers would have shot him on sight. Despite the fact that he had a white wife whose family was pro-slavery. Despite the fact that he had children that had to intermingle at the risk of their lives, he still fought for you. Fought for black people. And fought for all people. When it comes to fighting in a physical level, on a legislative level, and showing moral commitment to the end, there was no greater fighter for civil rights than Ulysses S. Grant. I agree with Frederick Douglass. I like your comments. Do you agree with me? Does this sound like an Uncle Tom statement to you? I'm curious to see what your comments are going to be. Thank you for listening. And investigate this for yourself before you put some stupid comments on the end. I don't want to argue with anybody that doesn't have knowledge. Am I Uncle Tom? Hell no. But I'm a person that believes that every man ought to be given their due honor.